James Dean. He was born in the early spring of 1931, a small-town boy from Indiana who would become the face of rebellion for an entire generation. James Dean's meteoric rise to fame was as brief as it was explosive. By the mid-1950s, he had starred in only 3 major films, yet his performances in Rebel Without a Cause and East of Eden cemented him as a cultural icon. What most people don't know is that Dean's obsession with speed wasn't just a hobby. It was a compulsion. He purchased his infamous Porsche 550 Spider, nicknamed Little Bastard, only days before his death in late September of 1955. The car itself became a symbol of eerie misfortune. After the crash that claimed his life at just 24 years old, the wreckage was sold off in parts, and every subsequent owner reported strange accidents or injuries. Even more unsettling, Dean had reportedly been warned by a fellow actor that the car had a bad energy. His death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a cultural turning point. Dean's untimely end immortalized him as the eternal youth, but it also left behind a chilling legacy of what could have been. Jean Harlow. Born in 1911, Jean Harlow was Hollywood's original blonde bombshell, a star who redefined glamour in the early days of sound cinema. By the time she was in her early 20s, she was one of the highest-paid actresses in the world, captivating audiences with her sharp wit and magnetic screen presence. Yet behind the glittering facade, her life was marked by turmoil. Few realize that Harlow's health began to deteriorate rapidly during the filming of Saratoga in 1937. At just 26 years old, she was suffering from severe kidney failure, a condition that was poorly understood at the time. Her co-stars noticed her bloated appearance and slurred speech, but the studio insisted she keep working. Even more tragic, her death could have been prevented. Medical experts later speculated that her condition was exacerbated by a childhood illness and years of untreated infections. Harlow's passing shocked the world, not just because of her age, but because it exposed the brutal realities of the studio system. She was a star who burned too brightly, and her death left a void in Hollywood that no one could fill. Carole Lombard. Carole Lombard was born in 1908, a Midwestern girl who became one of the most beloved actresses of the 1930s. Known for her comedic timing and radiant charm, she was a pioneer of screwball comedy and a box office sensation. But Lombard's life was as dramatic as any of her films. In early 1942, she was returning from a war bond tour when her plane crashed into a Nevada mountainside, killing everyone on board. She was only 33 years old. What's rarely discussed is the eerie series of events leading up to her death. Lombard had reportedly insisted on flying home, despite her mother's pleas to take the train. Some even claimed she had a premonition of the crash but dismissed it as irrational fear. Her death was not just a personal tragedy, it was a national one. As one of the first major Hollywood stars to actively support the war effort, she had become a symbol of patriotism. Franklin D. Roosevelt even described her passing as a loss to the nation. Lombard's legacy endures, but her untimely death remains one of Hollywood's most haunting stories. Rudolph Valentino. Born in the spring of 1905 in Italy, Rudolph Valentino became the first true heartthrob of Hollywood's silent film era. By the early 1920s, he was the face of romance, adored by millions for his smoldering performances in films like The Sheik and Blood and Sand. Yet, behind the glamour, Valentino's life was far from the fantasy he portrayed on screen. In August of 1926, at just 31 years old, he collapsed in New York City and was rushed to the hospital. Diagnosed with a perforated ulcer, his condition quickly worsened, leading to a fatal infection. What's rarely discussed is the chaos that followed his death. His passing triggered mass hysteria among his fans, with reports of fainting, riots, and even individuals vowing to end their own lives in grief. Even more bizarre, Valentino's funeral became a spectacle, with thousands lining the streets to catch a glimpse of his casket. Some accounts suggest that the actor's health had been deteriorating for months, but he kept it hidden to maintain his image as the ultimate leading man. Valentino's death marked the end of an era, but his legacy as Hollywood's first great icon remains untouchable. Peg Entwistle. Peg Entwistle's story is one of Hollywood's most haunting tragedies. Born in Wales in 1908, she moved to the United States as a child and dreamed of becoming a star. By the early 1930s, she had made a name for herself on Broadway, but her transition to film was far less successful. In 1932, she appeared in her first and only movie, 13 Women, a film that failed to make an impact at the box office. What makes Peg's story so chilling is how her life ended. In September of that same year, at just 24 years old, she was found at the base of the Hollywoodland sign, a symbol of the very dream she had chased. Her death shocked the industry, but what few realize is that her final film was released after her passing, and it gained a cult following in later years. Even more unsettling, some claim that her story inspired the myth of the Hollywood curse, a superstition that still lingers in the industry today. Peg's life was brief, but her tragic end turned her into a symbol of the darker side of fame. Robert Walker. Robert Walker was born in 1919 in Salt Lake City, Utah, and by the 1940s, he was one of Hollywood's most promising young actors. Known for his boyish charm and standout performance in Alfred Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train, Walker seemed destined for greatness. Yet, his personal life was marked by turmoil. His marriage to actress Jennifer Jones ended in a highly publicized divorce, and he struggled with emotional instability in the years that followed. In August of 1951, at just 32 years old, Walker died suddenly after being administered a sedative by his doctor. The official cause was listed as an adverse reaction, but questions have lingered ever since. Some accounts suggest that his mental health struggles may have been exacerbated by the pressures of fame and the studio system's relentless demands. Even more surprising, Walker's final film was released posthumously, and his performance was hailed as one of his best. His death remains a stark reminder of how the pressures of Hollywood could take a toll on even the brightest stars. Walker's talent was undeniable, but his life was a fragile thread that snapped far too soon. Carol Landis. Carol Landis was born in 1919 in Wisconsin, a small-town girl who dreamed of stardom and worked tirelessly to achieve it. By the early 1940s, she had become one of Hollywood's most glamorous leading ladies, known for her roles in films like 1 Million BC and Topper Returns. She was also a dedicated entertainer for the troops during World War II, traveling thousands of miles to perform for soldiers overseas. Yet, behind her dazzling smile, Landis struggled with personal heartbreak and professional frustrations. In July of 1948, at just 29 years old, she was found in her Brentwood home after her life came to a sudden and tragic end. What few people know is that Landis had been battling health issues for years, including severe bouts of depression, which were largely ignored by the studio system. Even more shocking, her death exposed the darker side of Hollywood's golden age, where stars were often left to fend for themselves emotionally and physically. Landis's passing was a devastating loss, but it also served as a grim reminder of the pressures that came with fame during that era. Jane Mansfield. Jane Mansfield was born in 1933 in Pennsylvania, a woman who would become one of the most iconic sex symbols of the 1950s and 60s. Known for her roles in films like The Girl Can't Help It and Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter, Mansfield was often compared to Marilyn Monroe, though she carved out her own unique identity as a performer. Beyond her bombshell persona, she was highly intelligent, with an IQ reportedly in the genius range, and spoke multiple languages. However, her life was as turbulent as it was glamorous. In June of 1967, at just 34 years old, Mansfield's life was cut short in a car accident while traveling to New Orleans. What many don't realize is that the accident also sparked a long-standing urban legend about her connection to the occult, fueled by her association with controversial figures like Anton LaVey. Even more unsettling, the crash led to changes in automobile safety standards, including the introduction of underride guards on trucks. Mansfield's death was a shocking end to a life filled with contradictions, but her legacy as a cultural icon endures to this day. Frances Farmer. Frances Farmer was born in 1913 in Seattle, Washington, a fiercely independent woman who defied the norms of her time. By the late 1930s, she was a rising star in Hollywood, known for her roles in films like Come and Get It and Rhythm on the Range. Farmer was celebrated for her raw talent and striking beauty, but her refusal to conform to the rigid expectations of the studio system made her a target. By the early 1940s, her career had begun to unravel, and she faced a series of personal and legal troubles that would ultimately overshadow her work. In 1948, at just 34 years old, Farmer's life took a tragic turn when she was institutionalized, a decision that remains controversial to this day. What few people know is that much of the narrative surrounding her life was sensationalized, with many of the most shocking claims about her treatment later debunked. Even so, her story became a symbol of the brutal cost of nonconformity in Hollywood's golden age. Farmer's life was a cautionary tale, but her talent and spirit continue to captivate audiences decades later. Carl "Alfalfa" Switzer. Carl Switzer, born in Illinois in 1927, became a household name as the mischievous and freckle-faced Alfalfa in the beloved Our Gang series. By the time he was just 12 years old, Switzer had already achieved a level of fame that most child actors could only dream of. However, his life after the series was far from the idyllic childhood his character portrayed. As he grew older, Switzer struggled to transition into adult roles, and his career began to falter. By the 1950s, he had largely left acting behind, taking on odd jobs to make ends meet. In January of 1959, at just 31 years old, Switzer's life came to a sudden and violent end during an argument over money. What many don't realize is that the circumstances surrounding his death remain shrouded in mystery. Official reports claimed it was self-defense, but conflicting accounts have led to speculation about what truly happened that night. Even more unsettling, Switzer's death was barely acknowledged by Hollywood, a stark contrast to the fame he had enjoyed as a child. His story is a sobering reminder of how fleeting stardom can be, especially for those who rise to fame too young. Thelma Todd. Thelma Todd, born in 1906 in Massachusetts, was a comedic powerhouse of the 1920s and 30s. Known as the Ice Cream Blonde, she starred alongside legends like the Marx Brothers in films such as Horse Feathers and Monkey Business. Todd's quick wit and radiant charm made her a favorite among audiences, but her life behind the scenes was far more complicated. In December of 1935, at just 29 years old, she was found in her car inside a garage near her cafe in Los Angeles. The official cause of death was ruled as carbon monoxide poisoning, but the circumstances surrounding her passing have fueled speculation for decades. Some believe it was a tragic accident, while others point to her connections with powerful figures in Hollywood and beyond, suggesting foul play. What's even more intriguing is that Todd had reportedly received threats in the weeks leading up to her death, adding another layer of mystery to the case. Her untimely passing left a void in the world of comedy, but it also exposed the darker undercurrents of Hollywood's golden age, where ambition and danger often went hand in hand. Bobby Driscoll. Bobby Driscoll was born in 1937 in Iowa and became one of Disney's first child stars, captivating audiences with his performances in Song of the South and Treasure Island. By the time he was 12, he had won an Academy Award for his role in The Window, cementing his place as one of the most talented young actors of his generation. However, Driscoll's life took a tragic turn as he grew older. By the late 1950s, his contract with Disney had ended, and he struggled to find work in an industry that had little use for former child stars. In March of 1968, at just 31 years old, Driscoll was found in an abandoned building in New York City. What's rarely discussed is how his death went unnoticed for weeks. with his remains buried in an unmarked grave until his identity was confirmed years later. Even more heartbreaking, Driscoll's struggles with rejection and the pressures of fame were largely ignored by the industry that had once celebrated him. His story is a poignant reminder of the harsh realities faced by child stars, whose fame often fades long before their lives do. Marie Prévost. Marie Prévost was born in 1998 in Canada and became one of the most glamorous stars of the silent film era. By the 1920s, she had transitioned to Hollywood and was a leading lady in films like The Marriage Circle and Kiss Me Again. Known for her beauty and comedic timing, Prévost was a favorite of directors like Ernst Lubitsch. However, the arrival of sound in cinema marked a turning point in her career. Like many silent film stars, she struggled to adapt to the new era, and her roles began to dwindle. By the early 1930s, Marie's career had all but faded, and she faced financial difficulties and personal struggles. In January of 1937, at just 38 years old, she was found in her Los Angeles apartment after passing away from malnutrition and complications related to her health. What's rarely discussed is how her death became a cautionary tale about the fleeting nature of fame in Hollywood. Even more tragic, her passing exposed the lack of support for actors who had once been at the top of their game. Her story is a haunting reminder of how quickly the industry could turn its back on its stars. Sharon Tate. Sharon Tate was born in 1943 in Texas and became one of the most promising actresses of the 1960s. Known for her roles in films like Valley of the Dolls and The Fearless Vampire Killers, Tate was celebrated for her beauty and charisma. By the late 1960s, she was on the brink of superstardom, married to acclaimed director Roman Polanski and expecting her first child. However, in August of 1969, at just 26 years old, Tate's life was cut short in one of the most infamous crimes in American history. What many don't realize is that Tate was more than just a victim of circumstance. She was a rising talent whose career was tragically interrupted. Even more unsettling, her death became a symbol of the darker undercurrents of the counterculture era, a time when Hollywood's golden veneer was beginning to crack. Tate's legacy endures not only as a talented actress, but also as a reminder of the fragility of life, even for those who seem to have it all. Ross Alexander. Ross Alexander was born in 1907 in New York and became one of Warner Brothers' brightest young stars in the 1930s. Known for his boyish charm and roles in films like Captain Blood and A Midsummer Night's Dream, Alexander seemed destined for a long and successful career. However, his personal life was marked by turmoil. His first marriage ended in tragedy, and his second marriage was reportedly strained by financial difficulties and the pressures of Hollywood. By the mid-1930s, Alexander's career had begun to falter, and he struggled to secure leading roles. In January of 1937, at just 29 years old, his life came to a sudden and tragic end. What's often overlooked is how Alexander's struggles reflected the harsh realities of the studio system, which often discarded actors who failed to meet its relentless demands. Even more surprising, his death occurred just days after the passing of his co-star Marie Prévost, adding an eerie connection between the two. Alexander's story is a poignant reminder of the immense pressure faced by actors during Hollywood's golden age, where success was fleeting and failure was unforgiving. Leah Deputy. Leah Deputy was born in 1906 in Hungary and rose to fame during the silent film era as one of the most enigmatic and alluring actresses of her time. Known for her roles in films like Variety and The Informer, she was often cast as the exotic femme fatale, a persona that captivated audiences across Europe and the United States. By the mid-1920s, Deputy had transitioned to Hollywood, where her striking beauty and magnetic screen presence made her a sought-after star. However, her career began to falter with the advent of sound films, as her thick accent limited her opportunities. In November of 1931, at just 29 years old, Deputy's life came to a sudden and tragic end due to complications from surgery. What many don't know is that her death was surrounded by whispers of neglect and mismanagement, with some suggesting that her health had been deteriorating for months before she sought medical help. Even more haunting, Deputy's passing marked the end of an era for the silent film stars who struggled to find their place in the rapidly changing industry. Her story is a poignant reminder of how quickly Hollywood could forget its brightest stars. Wallace Reid. Wallace Reid, born in 1991 in Missouri, was one of the most beloved leading men of the silent film era. Known as the King of Paramount, Reid starred in dozens of films, including The Roaring Road and The Affairs of Anatole, where his charm and good looks made him a favorite among audiences. However, behind the scenes, Reid's life was far from the glamorous image he portrayed on screen. In 1919, while filming a movie, he suffered a severe injury and was prescribed painkillers to manage his recovery. This marked the beginning of a downward spiral that would ultimately cost him his life. By January of 1923, at just 31 years old, Reid passed away after years of struggling with his health. What's rarely discussed is how the studio system played a role in his decline, pushing him to continue working despite his condition. Even more shocking, Reid's death exposed the darker side of Hollywood's golden age, where actors were often treated as commodities rather than people. His passing sent shockwaves through the industry, but it also sparked a conversation about the pressures placed on stars during that time. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our newest videos. Thanks for watching.